Coming up on Best of the West, a mental health expert shares his thoughts from serving the most vulnerable. His perspective is still fresh from working with seniors during the COVID-19 lockdown.
During COVID, people would come in and they'd have to be in the isolated wing for 2 weeks to be cleared to come into the general population of the group.
Also, let's learn some practical ways to keep your mental health on point, starting from what happens when you hit that snooze button.
So if you're going to hit the snooze button, make sure you have another 90 minutes.
That's a long time.
I know, most
90
of us...
minutes! All this and more on Best of the West.
The Best of the West show is designed to find the best companies, influencers, and business owners in the Fort Worth Metroplex. We learn what makes Fort Worth special by speaking with the experts and business owners that live, work, and play there. Whether it's the booming real estate market, amazing hospitality restaurants, or shopping, our experts dish on all things that make Fort Worth great. Hosted by the team of broadcasting professionals at Real News PR, this show is brought to you by Real News Communications Network.
Welcome to Best of the West, the best of the Fort Worth Metroplex. I'm Sarah Crilly, joined in studio today with my guest to talk about all things mental health. He is the mental health expert, and we're going to address some topics today that I think are so important. But what is mental health really? Our guest today is Brian Dunn. Welcome. You've got some impressive letters behind your name. What does that mean?
So an LCSW, that is a licensed clinical social worker. It means you got a master's degree in social work and then went on to get a clinical licensure.
And that's working with people.
That's right. Direct practice.
So why did you get into direct practice and working with people and being a licensed professional counselor?
I did study ministry in my undergrad. And so in working with people and families, I actually had a little bit of time working at a mental health hospital up in the Chicagoland area when I was still in my undergrad, and really grew to love the demographic and the population a little bit more than doing church work. I thought I wanted to get into mental health, so that's what put me into working at a residential treatment down here in Texas.
Yes, you had shared with me you felt a calling of working within the mental health field, and what did you find throughout your years of studying people and working with them directly?
I've learned that one of the things that I was told when someone was impacting my own life by just being an advocate for me and helping me out in my life, told me that the life change happens in the context of caring relationships. And I've always carried that with me. That was a professor and a mentor of mine. And so that was something that really influenced my desire to go out and do and replicate what I saw him doing in the lives of people. I wanted to do that too.
What was he doing in the lives of people? How was he making an impact?
He was very intentional.
He was.
Right? So intentionally building relationships with people can be very, the best counselor is a friend, right?
Right.
But also it can be a clinical setting where someone is able to just sit and listen, to hear you talk about and process things that you've gone through in your life, difficulties, challenges, getting advice. There's a whole lot that happens when we're helping people move through mental health issues, but just really life challenges that everybody faces.
I'm so glad you brought that up. Mental health issues, but challenges that we all may be facing. And let's take the stigma off of mental health of like, oh man, if I've got something going on, there must be something wrong with me. And that's not the message that we want out there. Everybody goes through things, sometimes more severe throughout periods of our lives, right? When's a good time to seek counsel or to ask for help?
So I think that when a person is going through an imbalance in their life, that's when you're going to see symptoms kind of manifest, right? So the people that I've worked with are coming in and they're identifying something that's causing them to feel out of balance. So a lot of the work that I do is very practical and simple to identify, giving someone the ability to evaluate and assess what are the things that are tipping my scales in the wrong direction. You imagine the old tippy scales. Imagine that on one side is overloaded with stressors and internal stressors, external expectations you have on yourself or others have on yourself. And then on the other side is the good side of the scale, and maybe there's things missing. Good self-care, good sleep, good activity, eating well, maybe taking medicine if that is something that's needed. So I think when you start to evaluate where your scales are out of balance, and you can really identify what work can be done, what needs to be dealt with on the heavy side, and what can we bring back in that's missing, that used to bring you into a healthy, thriving life.
Maybe it's something going on with family. Maybe it's the workplace. Maybe there's so many things out of your control, like the pandemic, Brian. So many of us, were found, just feeling lonely during that time, where nobody could have imagined being alone during the pandemic, lockdown, shelter in place, everything that we went through in 2020. What did you see during that time, and what's a message that you'd like to get out to the general public of after the fact of COVID, after COVID, or we're still in the middle of it now, but now that we are coming back together, and we've got so much to thank for that time of, okay, wow, though it was a very scary time with a global pandemic and so many uncertainties, I did see a rise in, our media talking about mental health and how to reach out to others and not feel so alone. Is that something that you would agree with?
Yes, absolutely. In fact, during that time, I was right in the middle of 8 years of working with geriatric folks, gero-psych. So I was going into skilled nursing facilities with some people that are already very lonely and isolated. They're not around their family. They've had major life change. They've lived extremely incredible lives and done wonderful things and lived very purposeful lives, and then have had to be placed into a skilled nursing facility is a very big adjustment. It's a stage of life where it can be very stressful. Some were more resilient than others. When the pandemic hit, you saw folks even more because people couldn't come and see them, right? They were closing the doors and parking them in their rooms and serving them food in their rooms if in fact there was an outbreak of COVID inside the facility. So this led to where you really saw those who were resilient and those who needed more care. I was fortunate enough to be one of the people that was allowed to come in and still visit folks and do therapy with them. That was a big deal.
Wow. And what did that look like? You knock on the door and say, "May I come in? Let's talk?" Or
Yes.
did you arrange, a meeting ahead of time, or what did that look like in your life?
And I carried a caseload, so I had people that the nurses and facility staff had already referred to me on my list that I would carry out. And so a lot of them I already built some rapport and had started with them, but there were some new folks that were coming in every day. They're having new admissions. Again, during COVID, people would come in and they'd have to be in the isolated wing for 2 weeks to be cleared to come into the general population of the group before they could come out to some of the activities and go to the dining room. What a start, right? You're going to, you've had a stroke or some kind of fall, and you go into a facility like this as a first time major life change. You're not going to be around your community and your friends and your family that you've known your whole life. And then, well, for the first 2 weeks, you're going to be isolated because of the COVID. So what you saw was a lot of people, again, showing some resilience in the ability to overcome based on the way that they lived some of their life, and then others that had a harder time, because if it's compounded with someone that already has depression, anxiety, or a history of medical illnesses and things that have, stacked up against them, and then you add them into the pandemic after being put into even if it's people at home that weren't living in nursing homes, just knowing that they had health risks and they had to very much take that serious to not get out there and not be in contact because they were at a higher risk from catching something that could, put them in the hospital, or, so you see that in that sense, people were able to make it through it, but there was a trauma that was related to that. So I think the after effect is now people are wondering, if this happens again, what if we get into another shelter in place? Now that they know what it's like and what's coming, I think that you're going to see a lot of people have a much harder time the second round, because it's what you don't know and what you know. Now we know what that's like. And sometimes anxiety builds as we anticipate something we know is going to be very challenging, difficult, traumatic, right? That's where you really see anxiety spike. is and that's where I think we'll see people maybe take a turn not for the good. So it's going to be very important that we're on top of it, we're proactive, and we have, that we're ready for walking with people and really being there for each other, whether you're in clinical side of it or you're just in the personal side of it with friends and family.
Wow, Brian, I'm so glad you brought up trauma. What is trauma? Let's pull back the layers of what is trauma. Is it something that happens to us, a traumatic experience,
Right.
so to speak, that it's something that you're trying to navigate through in the middle of a raised emotional state? What is trauma?
So trauma is going to be an experience that a person goes through physically in their life. A very severe example would be some of the kiddos that I worked with when I was just a mental health tech. And these were kids that had been exposed to severe systematic abuse or neglect, and as a result, it delayed them developmentally. So the trauma they experienced of being abused or neglected, they missed milestones in development that our normal healthy kiddos go through. So you might have a kid who got stuck at 7 years old cognitively, even though he's 17. And when a 17-year-old has a tantrum, let me tell you, there's some holes in the wall and some stuff ripped down, and there's going to be a real way to de-escalate and deal with a kiddo in crisis in that model, right? So that's an extreme example of how a trauma can be something very serious like sexual abuse or physical abuse and neglect. And then there can be things that we didn't think were coming, like this pandemic, where people didn't even see it coming, didn't know to expect that was going to be something that would make them feel very alone and on their own to figure out. The brain tries to process what's happening, and a lot of times you can get through something that you're actually going through, but it's the why. That's the part that when we deal with trauma that most of us as humans can relate to, is it's not so much that I was hit by something, life or physically, but why? Why did that happen to me? So Viktor Frankl is a guy that survived Auschwitz. And he was a psychiatrist that was put into the camps with his friends and family. And when he survived that, he wrote about his experience and what took place. One of the days he describes walking through, and he had gotten pretty good, he said, at staying out of the soldiers' way. And in the context of just walking from one building to another one day, he got leveled in the back of the head with the butt of a rifle by one of these soldiers. And face down in the snow, and he gets up, and once the pain subsided, he was left with that feeling of not so much the pain of what happened, but why. It was unjustified, it was unsolicited. That, to him, was psychologically more difficult to deal with, and he wrote about that. And I think that a lot of people can relate to asking that kind of a question. Why did this happen? It's unsolicited, it's unjust.
So share with me your journey. You've seen all walks of life. What has that been like, Brian?
So in the work that I've done, being able to work with kiddos locked up in the juvenile center, college students who are just coming to the counseling center, very highly intelligent, active, successful, but still dealing with anxiety. Again, working with the geriatric population. I've done couples counseling, and I've done therapy with individuals. Recently, I did some work with Fort Worth Police Department CIT, which is Crisis Intervention Team.
Wow. What was that like?
Yeah, it's a phenomenal group of people who are really getting out there on the front lines, really trying to be proactive. There's one thing to be on patrol as a police officer and react and respond to crisis, because they had to do that as well, talking someone down who was in a state of psychosis or suicidality in that moment. And then there's going and following up with these people is another component of that job, where they go and knock on the door and they say, hey, since you were taken to the hospital a month ago, how are you doing? Are you taking your medication? Are you going to your aftercare meetings? And the cool thing is Fort Worth is ahead of the curve. They're really getting out there with a team designed. They have clinicians that ride out, which is what I was. But I was vested up, riding shotgun, going to calls, and yeah, it was a neat thing.
Wow, that sounds like a dramatic difference, Brian, from the perspective that you shared of meeting with individuals after something's happened, like a trauma, and then being there on the scene as trauma's potentially happening.
That's right.
So share with me a little bit more of that perspective of, okay, trying to keep up with somebody that's recalling a memory or trying to put the pieces together, and then being on the scene as it's happening and so many heightened emotions, right?
Right.
What is that like?
So that was very interesting because that was honestly the last kind of check in all levels of care. That was being a first responder. This was the first time being a first responder in all levels of care. I've been there when the person gets to the hospital, and I'm the first one that shows up to do a psych assessment.
Mm-hmm.
I did that work for a few years. And then being, like you said, in those parts where they're in a hospital psych setting. I've worked in an inpatient psych hospital before. And then working with the next level of care, which is your IOP and PHP and therapy, right? So being even to the point of the skilled nursing and then even hospice, I did some work there. So really all levels of care have finally been completed after my time with Fort Worth PD. But it was very different because in that moment, when you are dealing with someone who's in crisis in that moment, I recall one gentleman who really did want help, and he was glad that we were there. He made an outcry. Someone called 911. We showed up and have to be very different in that approach to find out what we're dealing with and assess that in a certain way. And that team taught me how to carry myself in that setting, which I had never done before.
So where's Brian going now? Where's your career taking you now?
So what's funny is it's kind of full circle because earlier in my career, as I got here into Texas about 20 years ago, after I got my licensure, I started working with a local hospital, and I was doing clinical work for them, but I was also doing business development, marketing, right? So getting the word out about our treatment programs. So here I am 10 years later after doing 10 years of just clinical work, and I'm on the business development team with Connections Wellness Group.
All right, Connections Wellness.
Here we are.
What is Connections Wellness? Share with me.
So Connections Wellness Group started in 2018, and this was started by a guy who's also an LCSW like myself, but he was a young guy when he went into the field as a mental health tech at a hospital up in Denton, and then he became their CEO at, I think, age 24. Then he branched off with some other people, some other folks. They borrowed money and invested and just said, we want to do it different. So they started Connections Wellness Group to get out there and do something with a different model. So his approach has been to really build into the team, the people who are providing the wellness and healthcare and connecting to the community. And there's an environment there that I got really excited about. There's a medical provider, a doctor. Our director of medical care is a very well-known psychiatrist, Dr. Atkinson. And that excited me to be a part of anything that she's doing.
Yes.
Right? And I think the other thing that was just nice is I got the sense from the team that I was joining that there's going to be a lot of autonomy. You're going to be able to be creative and innovative, and you're going to be given the green light to do some things if it makes sense. So I got the sense from meeting the CEO that he looks at us more like partners and how can we do this thing together. And that's very unique to me. Being in the field for this many years, I just got really excited, and after meeting him and hearing kind of his philosophy, all these ideas started popping into my head. I mean, I just started having all kinds of, it just felt very liberating and freeing to be a part of that. And that's a team of very qualified clinical experts in the field. Anybody could have been here today and done some great things with you and your program. And so it's nice to be a part of a team like that. And so I feel, again, just really privileged and humbled to be a part of Connections Wellness.
Yes, I love it. And Connections Wellness is such an amazing name because you're all things mental health experts. You're all experts in the mental health field.
That's right.
So when someone comes to you or makes a phone call, what services do y'all provide?
So you could think of it as a one-stop for all things outpatient mental health. From every level of care, leaving the hospital is a partial hospitalization program, which is PHP, intensive outpatient, which is your IOP. These are both group therapies that operate 5 days a week. So as a person comes in, they're in group therapy for 5 days. If they're there in the PHP, a little bit more intense, it's that extra hour a day of a little more therapy. But these are people that are working folks. These are kids that are in school. So while they're in school, if they're in the KID program, they're able to break off, do a couple hours of school, get their accreditation while they're in there for 5 weeks so they don't fall behind, while also getting the therapy that they need. And we have individual therapy, and then we have psychiatrists and nurse practitioners doing med management. So that's a really big deal for us to be able to be out there and say, hey, we can get your person, and we go to a doctor, and I say, how many people are coming to you that need, psych meds? Mm-hmm. They're like every other day. I said, well, you can send them our way. We can get people seen pretty much the next day.
Wow.
And that might be changing as we're growing, but right now, we can still get someone in the next day, whether it's in person or virtual, for them to manage meds, and we take all insurances.
That's so fantastic.
Yeah, and the private pay is not bad. It's like $150, which is about half of what your going psychiatrist gets.
Yes.
So we got some nice advantages, and we cover a lot of ground. I would say the biggest thing that makes it very unique is each clinic, if it's an adult clinic, let's say, you're going to have every piece of that in there where they're collaborating. So your psychiatrist or your nurse practitioner is working with someone for meds. And they go, I think it would be good for you to go to our IOP. Let's get you over there. So it's a seamless transition, sign you up for IOP group therapy, and a person gets the chance to get out there and start working through some of those things that have been holding them back. But the clinician and the psychiatrist are in-house, and they get to communicate with each other. And then if they go to an individual therapist, or someone comes in to do some couples counseling, if maybe them and their family needs work or family work, these clinicians are all in-house, and the person can seamlessly stay right in there and cover these needs, and the team is talking to each other and communicating. That's a very unique model to collaborate as a team for someone's care, instead of having to bounce all over the Metroplex.
To catch everybody up to speed on what's happening, because they're all connected.
That's right.
Connected wellness.
Connected wellness.
So what locations, and I know it's a fast-growing company, what locations do you serve right now?
So we are in McKinney and in Prosper. We just opened Rockwell. We have Denton is where it started and grew. So everything's going on up there, from eating disorder program called Mindful, which is an awesome program. When I started, I got to go tour it and see these kids actually preparing and plating their own foods and learning about nutrition and food. They bring families in on a Tuesday night to do a dinner. So they teach the parents how to work with food, their kids. That's really cool. We're all the way down here now in Arlington. We have a Mansfield Kiddos program that's going to open at the end of July, around August. West Fort Worth is going to be in Willow Park at the end of 23. So we're covering some ground, and we're growing. So we have 12 with 11 and 12 opening soon, but 10 are operating right now, and every one of them's operating virtually. So
that's so exciting. Congratulations. Yeah. So to close, Brian, share with me just some helpful tips that anybody can do in general maintenance of their mental health. Some things that maybe we haven't thought about before.
Okay,
How important is the breakfast in the morning?
Yes, that's right. And so I'm glad you asked that, because honestly, the one mantra that I stick with the most when I'm working with people and I've done clinical work is, again, how do we find that balance, right? If we know we're out of balance, the model I teach is your resilience is going to be low. When we're out of balance, the things that bubble up and manifest are your mental health issues, like depression, anxiety, addiction, our impulses, our compulsions, our eating. All of these things bubble up and manifest when we're operating out of balance for days or weeks or months.
And break that down. Out of balance meaning out of your routine, out of what you predictability is going to happen, or out of balance of what we know now is normal. Is that?
That's right. So, and it could be, everybody's individual is different, right? So it could be that someone is not getting enough sleep. They're overworked at work, and they're not getting enough self-care where they're getting out and doing a thing that they loved. Your producer and I were talking about kayaking that I got to do over the weekend, and just to get out on the water and do a little fishing with the family and be able to recharge when we're working hard during the week is important to us. So eating good and sleeping good and staying active are the things that I try to help people find. Are you doing that? If you had a loved hobby that you've always done your whole life, but all of a sudden you stop doing that, like playing the piano or going to the park and doing photography, these are the kinds of things people have told me help refuel them emotionally and recharge them, and are usually missing when they come to me and they're out of balance. So identifying those things to bring back in, and then working through the plates that are loaded up on this side. Sometimes it's intense with trauma and stressors and things from the past. Most of the time it's pretty relative to what's going on right then. Too much on their plate, too many expectations on them, like college students that want to get the grade and get that great career. So really, at the end of the day, it's up to the person to sit back and evaluate what's contributing to me not sleeping. What can I do differently at night to, instead of busy, eating a bunch of sugar, caffeine, ice cream, watching Netflix, then I try to turn out the light, and then I'm on my social media.
And some of that's subconscious, right? You're just
Right.
like, I
The
need
screen.
something to feel better, right?
Right. So when you start to kind of, why don't I give myself a little hour buffer to kind of come in for a landing? I try to teach people to look at your evening routine and create a little buffer where you're doing more calming, relaxing, less stimulus to kind of come in for that landing and then hit the light off, right? That resonates with people.
And it's only human to kind of be out of balance, right? In a way.
That's right.
You shared with me you're going to be traveling. What do you do to be back in balance, right? You're going to
That's
be
right.
traveling, and so many things come at you. But how
Right.
do you kind of be in the driver's seat of, hey, I know myself, and I need to make sure that I instill these habits, or
That's right.
the mindfulness, the hour of mindfulness that you're talking about landing the plane. What do you do personally? Who's Brian? What do you do to kind of keep yourself balanced?
So that's a good question. So I do try to really be careful about how much stimulus I bring in. Anything I'm looking at, listening to, eating, drinking, those are stimulations, right, to the brain when you're trying to calm down, right? So trying to rein those in, I try to read something calming, drink some nighty time tea, right? Sitting in bed next to my wife and just kind of enjoying a light, easy show. Usually she wants to watch Hallmark.
I'm a Hallmark fan too. I can't watch anything
I just said
that's
that,
scary
and now
or
everybody's going to
intense.
know that I watched the Hallmark. Because she puts me in there. Yeah.
I think it's helpful. It's
Yeah.
helpful. Well, I'm glad that you brought that up, Brian, is because the things that we're watching and, using almost as a self-soothe in a way, like, I just want to escape. I just want to
Right.
live someone else's life on
Right.
social media, or watching somebody, fall in love on the Hallmark Channel.
That's
or,
right.
Why is it that we want, is that escapism, or not,
Some
kind
of
of
it
in
is.
our own head to
Yeah.
be able to think about what's going on in our lives, to be able to process through? Talk a little bit more about that.
Yes, some of that is going to be, again, when we're here, we're going to go to something that's comforting. Well, we know that screen time is activating dopamine. Mm-hmm. We literally are seeing kids get addicted every day to the lights and the activity of TikTok and the things on their phone because of the dopamine levels that give you an accelerant to how you're feeling. Even though it's temporary, even though you can't maintain a status of dopamine forever, so it lacks, it drains. And so we go to it again. Well, there's a lot of things that fill that component, from extremist drugs to the phone becoming a drug to food. But dopamine is the thing that's giving us that fill or that desire, right? And so feeding that becomes comforting in the moment, but then it's depleting and kind of leaves us lacking, right? So really being able to deal with stress with healthier activities like your routines, preparing your own foods and staying away from some of those. Again, if I'm out of balance and I'm running around and I don't put a good routine, I'm probably going to run through the drive-through. Instead, if I planned ahead and I made some meals and I had my food tucked away in a little cooler, I don't stress about it. I know what I'm eating. I prepared. I'm excited to eat it. So I teach a lot about how to make a relationship with food change where you're feeling like not stressed about what you're going to eat. It's ready to go. It's good for you. You enjoy it. There's ways to do that, and there's plenty of people out there to follow that can teach us how to do that. And healthy lifestyles like exercise, right? Sleep is an important thing. And so anything you can do to create good sleep is going to contribute.
How many
to that.
hours, Brian? How many hours of sleep do you
Yeah.
really need?
It changes, right?
Does it?
My 5 going on 6-year-old can knock out 12 hours. And I covet that. And I'm like, how can you have that much energy and sleep just perfectly for 12 hours? I'm like, man, I wish I had that. But I think when you're in the 8 range, that's always what's been said as a healthy, 8 hours of sleep is good. And there might be, depending on your lifestyle, college students that I work with are not getting 8 hours very often. But if they get 6 or 5, I go, okay, that's something. Again, create that habit of when you're waking yourself up at the same time every day, you're correcting your circadian clock, right? So if you're a person that's been waking up all over the board, you're going to notice that. If you try to rein it into a window of more 6, 7, 8, whenever you want to get up, and you try to keep that consistently, you can correct your sleep clock over time by going to bed at a certain time and waking up at a certain time. Pretty soon your body doesn't even need a clock. It'll just wake up.
I've always been really interested in that. 'Cause I'm like, how is it that I'm waking up at 5 every morning and I'm just waking up?
That's right. That's your
It's a
circadian clock.
rhythm.
That's your rhythm.
Interesting.
So if you've been consistent enough in your life, then your body starts to recognize that, and you'll just
You just
you've
wake up.
created that. Yeah.
Now, is it important to try to push yourself to go back to sleep because you think you might need more sleep, or when you're up, you should be up for the day and go to sleep a little earlier? Is there kind of some wisdom behind that?
Yes, there is, because I listened to a lady that was an expert on this, and she lectured and said that actually there's 90-minute cycles. So if you're going to hit the snooze button, make sure you have another 90 minutes.
That's a long time.
I know. Most
90
of us
minutes.
we're looking at 15 or 20, and she says if you're up, then you should get up if you don't have at least
If you don't
another
have
sleep cycle of
another hour and a
90
half.
minutes. Yeah.
Wow.
So if
Hear
it's
that,
4:30,
Ziggy?
right.
We can't hit the snooze button, man, because at 5 I do. I'm
Right.
thinking, oh man, everybody's still asleep. Let
Right.
me just get, another half an hour. But then I do feel like I'm tired, and then I get in this cycle of an extra shot of espresso
That's
in
right.
my Starbucks just to kind of get myself a
Oh,
little
yeah.
more
Oh, yeah.
bright-eyed and bushy-tailed.
Oh, and that was
Does
me
sound
yesterday.
familiar?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, yesterday I got up at 4 a.m. way too early, but I was just awake, and I thought, okay, I could sit and read. I could go to the gym when it opens in an hour at 5. What should I do, right? So I ended up just getting some tea, a little bit of green tea, and I got a book, and I just started reading some things really to get ready for today. So I try to be constructive with it. If you're going to wake up, there are things you can do. When I was trying to correct my sleep clock back in the day, finding something like an activity in the morning that you really enjoy can help you get out of bed. So I switched my evening show that I was watching. I was caught on this show I was watching, and I switched it to the morning, which is a strange thing to do. I never watch TV in the morning. But I said, to get my clock back, I'm going to look forward to this show that I really want to see, and I'll make it in the morning. So I got up and I got coffee, and I would flip it on, and it helped me correct and start getting up at that time I wanted to. So
I love that. Thank you, Brian, for sharing those personal, anecdotes
Yeah.
of your life and the little peek behind the window of, Brian has so much wisdom to share with all of us. I really appreciate you being on the show. And the overall message, guys, is to know yourself and to have those healthy balances. And perhaps if you feel out of balance, give Brian a call. Reach out to Connected Wellness because they are super connected and continue to be.
that's right.
Brian, how do we get a hold of you?
So you can go to your phone or your computer, and you go to connectionswellnessgroup.com.
Connectionswellnessgroup.com.
Yes, ma'am. And when you go on there, you're going to be able to explore all kinds of resources. You'll be able to see all of our clinicians and our staff. You'll be able to see articles we're contributing to, all of our programs all over the Metroplex. Really, it's a one-stop, again, where you can find out what you need and pass it on to someone else or take it on for yourself.
The experts in all things mental health. Thanks so much for being on the show, and we'll see you guys next time.
This show is brought to you by Real News Communications Network, your digital destination for video podcasts, produced by media and podcast experts. Podcasting at the speed of news, powered by Real News PR. Visit realnewscn.com for our podcast show library and launchashow.com to do just that, launch a show.